a small chat.
Oh, it's live. Okay.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Oh, there's Emma.
Oh,
Hi, Emma.
Hey.
Yes. Yay! Everybody's here now. That's perfect. So welcome if you are here in the chat and you read along with us. I know some people have been commenting that they did, and we're gonna get started in a minute here. We have some discussion questions, but maybe to start off with, I should say we read "The Man Born to Be King" by Dorothy L Sayers for an Advent read along. And yes, we have it here. This is a cycle of 10 plays about the life of Jesus, and it's really reimagining what the Gospels tells us. And so we'll talk about maybe some of the differences between the Gospel narratives and this play itself, because sometimes it streamlines it a bit for the story's purposes. But yeah, we've read Dorothy L Sayers for a couple of read-alongs, and she's always a treat. So definitely let us know in the comments if you have any answers to our discussion questions. We'd love to hear from you and what you thought. And would my co-hosts like to introduce themselves, starting with Carla and their channels?
I'm Carla with Raised to Walk, and Christy actually was kind of my first person that I discovered that was doing books kind of like I like to read. So
yes, Carla was like my first friend on YouTube. And you read
yeah, I did. Okay, so I read all different kinds of books. I basically on my channel I do Bible studies, and sorry, I'm kind of a little out of it because, like I was telling Christy, I got stuck in traffic, so this is kind of just winging it. But I do Bible studies and videos about books, and types of books. I would have to say I don't even know what my genre is. I think that's probably why I confuse YouTube. Sometimes I do theology books, sometimes I do fiction. Honestly, I think when I'm kind of get back in my groove next year, I think I might be doing a lot about disability and inclusion, because I started publishing some books, and the first independent author, other author that I published is it's a story at Wingless. It's about and he's blind, so it's kind of like understanding how people who are disabled live in a world that's not made for them. And I've come across a couple of other people that have books like that too. So I'm thinking I might do, I don't know, I was just thinking about that yesterday when I was talking to one of the authors. I might do some books about that address that. So I don't know. I mean, how would you, I don't even know whatever strikes me, that's what I do.
Yeah, that's the fun part about BookTube. You can pretty much, you can make your channel your own. You don't have to fit into a mold.
Yeah.
I think that's by far the most interesting reading life, when you can read just what catches your fancy.
Yeah.
Victoria, would you like to introduce yourself and your channel?
Sure. Victoria, and my channel is A Musical Bookworm, and I read all over the place too. Classics, fantasy, faith-based books is probably the three main that make an appearance on my channel. But I feel like if you watch Christy's channel, you probably know me already.
Yes, we do lots of things together. And Emma, would you like to introduce your channel and yourself?
So my channel is Bookish Princess. I post mostly about books, but kind of a smattering of other things as well, travel, and kind of like what you were saying, Christy, like whatever strikes my fancy of what I feel like sharing. But yeah, I like a lot of classics and faith-based works as well. And this was so much fun. I'd never even heard of this play cycle, and I love Dorothy Sayers, so this was such a treat.
Yay! Oh, I'm so glad you were enjoying it. I just saw that Victoria was talking about it in her first video in a while. So I was watching that as I was getting ready for this. So I'm really looking forward to hearing everybody's thoughts. And let's say hi to the chat. So Faith is here. Hello, Faith.
Hi, Faith.
I know Faith was reading along with us, and she said she's gotten through play 7, which I think is around where my mom got as well. And I think that's around where I got as well before I had to stop reading physically and switch to the audio version. So it's like, it's pretty meaty, you know. It's not something you can speed through.
Mm-hmm.
Hello there, cool gamer. Afternoon, Tony. And Kristen is here. Hello, Kristen.
Kristen, we miss you.
Yes.
You know, that's one of the things that as I was, I actually listened to most of it on audiobook, which this is, I think, the only second audiobook that I've done. But it's almost something that I feel like I should go through again and read this book, the play, listen to it, because it really does. It's almost like you are, you know, listening to, obviously it is, it's a play, but
Yes.
it's really well produced on the audiobook, like you guys were saying in the sprints, but also like looking at the scripture and what it's covering. I think that would be good to do a study, or you know what I mean, like take some time and go through it.
Yeah, because she adds a lot in here that's like commentary on like the parables and stuff like that. So it would be really interesting to read it alongside the Gospels and compare her interpretation. And sometimes well, that's one of our discussion questions. Should we like just put that up?
Mm-hmm.
So we have some other questions that I was going to do before this, but since we're talking about it, what to you guys stood out as something that was maybe a little different from the biblical narrative, maybe just for the story purposes that was changed?
Okay, so I didn't actually go back and check this, but when the part where he's going to the fishermen and the nets didn't break, did they? They started to break.
Oh, interesting.
I don't think they actually broke, but I don't know. I didn't go back and look and just to check that, but I don't think that it did.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't notice that because it says they were like straining, like very full, you know.
Yeah. Because what would be the good of catching them if you lost all the fish?
Yeah. Yeah. She was adding some high drama there, perhaps.
Yeah.
I liked the part where, because she kind of discusses this in the introduction, that the sequencing of the events of Christ's life, how, you know, because she knew Greek, so she went back and like looked at the original Greek versions of the New Testaments and was studying them really carefully. And that incident of Christ with the money changers at the temple, she puts that at the very beginning of his ministry. And I think maybe technically it's like later on in whichever gospel it's in. But I just thought that was really interesting how she was saying, like, this makes sense. It came at the beginning. It's sort of like his announcement, or like, you know, like he kind of made a big splash when he first came on the scene. And I'd never thought of that before, of like, you know, like the order of events, because like at Mass every week, you know, as a Catholic, we hear a reading from the Gospel, so you don't always hear it in sequence. But seeing her pay so much attention to, okay, what happened when, was really, really fascinating.
Definitely.
Yeah, go ahead, Victoria.
Oh, I was actually going to say Faith brought up Judas in the chat, and I was going to talk about Judas as well. I found like her theories about Judas's motivations very interesting, and just like what his thoughts would have been. And she kind of played him as like he was like how he tried to justify things to himself, of like he's actually like Judas is actually doing right by Jesus and like saving Jesus from himself, because Jesus has, you know, kind of gone off the path. I found that really interesting. And then the realization that Judas has, that Judas he's like, I was totally wrong about this. Like, I thought about this completely wrong. I found that really I don't know, just really insightful from Dorothy L Sayers to like kind of like conjecture a little bit about like what might his motivations and like deeper thinking have been behind his actions. Because it's like you can't really know that from from what we get in the Bible exactly as far as like his psychology. So I found that just a really interesting element.
Yeah, because it's not really in the Bible at all, is it? I'd never really fully thought about that before. Because like everyone knows Judas, like it's a word in popular culture as well as a person in the Bible. But like even in the Bible, we don't get an explanation of, well, why did he? Was it just? It couldn't have just been greed. You don't become one of the 12 apostles and then just because you need 20 pieces of silver sell Christ out. Like there had to be more to it than that. And I just thought that was so fascinating that Dorothy Sayers, the way she picked it apart.
Yeah, I think that was really good. I just the way he, like in the beginning, he's saying, he's the Messiah if Israel recognizes its salvation. I thought that was really awesome, and that whole scene with the who is Baruch? Because I was listening in an audiobook that the Zealot.
Yeah, but Baruch, he's like a leader of the Zealots.
Okay, so and he's like, oh well, because when I wasn't reading it at that point, I was listening, and so it seemed to me like he was like a leader, and he was like saying, you have to take people and they don't know what's good for them, and you have to manipulate them, because it's kind of seemed like they thought that Jesus was like this, just a little bit too idealistic and didn't really needed to be managed and taken care of, and they had to find a way to justify it, and it just reminded me of like what we're going through now. I mean, people use religion, the behind the scenes manipulators, play on the religious and to their own purpose. It's like they saw God himself and they still they think God needs managing. They think God needs managing to bring it about. Like they don't really, like they have a better way. I think that was.
Yeah, didn't she compare kind of Judas's sin is like the devil's sin, where it's like I know better than God.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I just and the other thing that this was in the intro, I think. She was talking about the Gospels. I didn't really quite agree with some of her assessment of it. Matthew, I mean, it's thematic. I mean, when you read his stuff, he's talking to a purpose. And she sees John as more chronological, but I think that Luke is actually the most chronological gospel. That was just interesting to me, that take on how the perspective of the Gospels, how they were structured. What else did she say about John?
I think she described him as like the eyewitness, like he was the one who was there. Was her take on John?
Okay, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, she did make several comments on John. I don't remember what they all are now, but I remember Emma mentioned it in our reading sprints that she seemed to really appreciate John's the most, because sometimes John would give like the why something happened.
Yeah, and I mean in that final play especially, I thought that was fascinating how like the other disciples are like, John, you're the one he loves best. Like, aren't you upset that he came to Peter? And yet John, and I mean, it's funny because in the Gospel of John, he does remind us that he's the disciple. And yet he doesn't well, it's not that he doesn't enter into competition at all. He also reminds us that he got to the tomb first and like stuff like that. And yet you don't see him angry that Peter is the rock, upon which the church is built. Like you don't see him jealous in that respect. But obviously Dorothy kind of shows that Judas is a little jealous of that. I've been reading the notes. She had producers' notes it's like that she gave to the producer when these were recorded before each play. And in one of them she notes that Judas had a high intellect, in terms of intellect and heart. Judas really relied on his intellect and he believed based on proof, because he was watching carefully but John had John kind of let his heart lead. And even though his intellect didn't understand everything, he just went with his heart and figured my intellect will catch up later. Like at the very beginning when John first meets Jesus and he just kind of instantly, falls in love with him, but in this beautiful way. I thought that was a neat kind of juxtaposition between the two of them. It's like John has heart and lets his heart lead.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
You know, okay, the other thing I never realized. So we, in my Bible study at church, we've been in John 1, and we did call the disciples. I never realized that James was Jesus's cousin until I was hearing it. Son of Zebedee. Never, ever clicked for me. Is that like an obvious thing that everybody knows? I never thought about it.
But that would make John Evangelist Jesus's cousin too.
Yeah.
I feel like that aspect of things, because one of the Jameses is supposed to be Jesus's brother in some traditions.
Well, that's
So-
they
Yeah,
didn't,
that's what
they
I've
didn't,
heard.
they didn't believe in him though until after the resurrection.
Right. Yeah.
His family didn't, but John. I mean,
Oh
he was
wait,
saying-
there are two Jameses though, aren't there? So there was
Yeah.
maybe there was one James who was related to him, and then there was James and John.
yeah. So
Yeah.
James, so John the Baptist is Jesus's cousin.
Right. Yes.
So I wasn't reading the Bible when I was doing this, but he was saying James, son of Zebedee, and so that is John the Baptist. No, it's Zacharias. Never mind.
There was two
I got you.
Jameses and two Johns.
Yeah. Okay.
It's
I'm
very
confused.
confusing. I like
I was
to
confused.
Only
Zebedee.
one Mary, interestingly enough, because she put the two Marys together. That some people, I feel like there's two traditions. There's the fact that Mary, Martha's sister, is a different Mary from Mary Magdalene, but in this play, they were the same Mary. So she put together the two Marys, and I just figured, oh, it's probably just to make the play simpler, and because Mary and Martha are, it makes sense that they're so different, you know, in that story about Mary and Martha, where Martha is like cooking in the kitchen and Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus and listening. Like I thought it worked really well character-wise to have Mary Magdalene be Martha's sister. But that's definitely different than how I've always thought about them. I've always thought there was two of them in the Bible.
Yeah, I feel like that was more of like a practical decision, probably
Yeah.
for like simplifying an audio drama. Many Marys.
One thing that I thought was really cool was how I mean, like some characters she condensed, but there were other characters that, like in the Bible, it's just like this man came up or this woman, you know, whereas he gives them a name, and even, or she gives them a name and like even connects them, like the Roman who who asks Christ to heal his servant is the same as the Roman at the foot of the cross who says, surely this was the Son of God. And actually we saw him too at the beginning. He worked for Herod. So I just thought that was so fascinating, because when you read them in the Bible, it's just like a man came to Jesus. Whereas here it's like, this was the man's name. This was where he lived. This was what he was like. Just drawing out the characters a little more.
I thought that was really interesting. The context of that Roman going to Jesus, like why they, why he did, or I guess it would be, I don't know. I mean, what do you think the dynamics would have been? Like, the Romans are the occupiers. They're in positions of power. They're going to this Jewish teacher, prophet, whatever they thought he was. Oh, they called him the Jewish Apollo. Wasn't that cool?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool. That is
Yeah.
interesting. Let's get back to the chat for a little while and catch up here. So Faith said she's going to finish up in Lent, which I think is a really smart
idea.
idea. Because that was one thing Victoria mentioned in her video, that this seems more like a Lent read than an Advent read. And I was actually like thinking about that when I was putting this together, and I was just like, I don't want to wait for Lent. I want to do it for this.
It works. You know what? It works either way.
But it actually would work very well for Lent. Yeah, Faith. And Mom, if you want to finish it up, then it would also work for you. I know my mom is here. Hi, Mom.
Buddy.
So, did you guys know that there's that annotated edition that's coming out in in January.
I saw that. When I
Yeah.
was looking for like a cover to put up on the screen, I was like, "Oh, that's beautiful. I want to order that." And then it's like, it doesn't come out till
I know. I was like, no, it's not out yet.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even know it was coming out. That's exciting.
But we could continue to read it and get her copy and then have her come and talk.
Yeah.
She
Oh,
has
that
a
would be-
YouTube channel. Did you know that?
Really?
Mhm.
That is cool.
She does. Catherine Weir.
Oh,
Nice.
She has some videos about what does she talk about? The mind of the maker. How does she refer to the creation? So Tolkien refers to it as eucatastrophe. How does Sayers refer to it? Emma,
Oh,
do you
is
know?
it different?
Well, I mean, it's the same sort of thing, but you know how she refers to it in a specific way, and I should know this because we've had some essays in an unexpected journal about it, but I can't remember right at the moment. She talks about how artists are. It's the same kind of concept, but she has a different name for it.
Hmm.
Do you guys know what I'm talking about?
I can't remember.
I don't know. I've heard eucatastrophe before. I remember.
Well, Tolkien talks about sub-creators, and so she refers to it kind of the same way, but she has it. Okay, I'm gonna go look up that that essay.
Okay.
I'll tell you what it is.
Well, you're doing that. So Kristen ended up listening to all 12. That is. Oh, actually, we had a question about that. Do you prefer listening to it or reading it? What did you guys?
So I ended up listening to all 12 as well. I've just been reading like the notes in the introduction, but the actual characters I listened to. And I think it's the same as the one on YouTube. It was like the audiobook version that I purchased. I think it was done in like the 70s or something. Which at first, especially, I found it to be a little bit melodramatic. Like the production, it's like I liked the production, but I also felt like it was a little bit distracting. But I think once I got used to it, I really enjoyed it. And I sometimes with plays do find it easier just because it is, broken up into John, Mary, John, like just the practical sequencing of it is a little jarring to read because it's not like just reading a novel. So I did like listening to it.
I actually didn't even try to listen to it. I just read it physically because I wanted to make sure that like I knew who was speaking and I could like analyze things a little bit more. And I just, that's just how I prefer to read because I know myself, and with audio I sometimes like daydream. So
I do that too.
I didn't even try to listen to it, but I think if I came back to it a second time, I would definitely try to listen to it.
I like the audiobook, but I do the same thing. I knew I was kind of like zoning out a little bit, so it probably would have been better if I had been reading it as I was listening to it. But it was really, I don't know, it was a really cool experience. I think different things stood out to me than if I was reading. Like I said, I lied. I have listened to, this is my third audiobook. I also, The Dish of Words, I listened to that through, but it's like you pick up different things depending on the format.
Mm-hmm.
It's so interesting to hear from Kristen and Faith in the chat. That looks like it's fun that there's a mix, some listening, some reading.
Yes.
There were moments, as Kristen says, where it was a little hard with all the apostles. It was a little hard to figure out which apostle was talking. Although I liked how, and this was something Dorothy Sayers noted to the producer, that she wanted Matthew to have a Cockney accent. Like he's just this kind of small-minded, money-grubbing, like Londoner Cockney. So that Matthew, I felt like I could pick out more easily than the others.
Yes. She had so many notes on every character. It was really fun.
Yeah, I do think if you... Oh, sorry, Christy, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Emma was mentioning the notes, and yeah, I think one of the benefits to reading it physically is getting the notes because they're really interesting. And she really goes into the characterization and like what her thought process was in the notes. So I would say like I think that's worth getting a physical copy if you just listened to it. Like even though it's intended to be listened to, I think the notes are definitely worth going through if you like want to take the time.
Because she put a lot of thought into it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like she really imagined everything so fully.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree. I preferred reading it physically. But at a certain point, I was only, a little over halfway through, and I really needed to finish it, so I switched to the audio. But reading it, I almost feel like reading the notes after reading the play would have even been a better idea for me than starting each play with the notes, because then I know what she's talking about when she's describing this scene should be read this way, and stuff like that.
I think that would be a very solid approach to read them actually after.
Yeah. So I probably will, maybe I will read what I listened to during Lent and go back and, I didn't actually read the introduction this time. I read it the first time I read this, but maybe I will do that for Lent.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Yes, we miss you, Kristen. Oh, good. So Kristen has the physical version to go through. Excellent. I feel like a lot of authors and academics do this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, cool. Yes, excellent.
I didn't know she did a translation of the Divine Comedy.
So excellent. I read it. I read it last year, and it is brilliant. And the notes, especially, it is like reading Dante with like an extremely intelligent, well-read, well-researched friend. Like she just makes.
Oh man,
she loves Dante so much that like she's like your Virgil. Like Virgil is showing Dante through hell and purgatory, and it's like Dorothy Sayers is showing you through Dante's Divine Comedies. They're so good.
that's good to know. I'm gonna have to read the Divine Comedy that way whenever I get to it.
Yeah, it's the I think it's just like the Penguin Classics, the one with like the black bar across. That's hers.
Oh, cool. That's awesome.
I read the first one. I read Hell in school with her notes on it, and then I remember watching Emma read through Purgatorio and Paradiso, and I was like, with her notes, and so I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to get those and finish that.
I think the Inferno is my favorite out of the Divine Comedy.
It's very
Purgatory is interesting. I really, just to be honest with you, I don't really like Paradise.
You don't like Paradise? Paradiso is my favorite. I feel like that's what the whole point. That's the whole point of it. That's what we were getting to. Just like
here's the thing.
Description of like harmony in it, and yeah.
I just felt like I have issues with Dante. Just to be honest, he. If you go and you read like who some of the people were that he's talking about, he's really kind of very ungrateful to people who had helped him out. And the whole thing with Beatrice and his wife and his family, don't like it all. He was like just mooning over Beatrice his whole life, this woman he doesn't even know. I mean, if you look at
in the end, it's not at all like tawdry, it's she led
no,
him
I'm not
to
saying
heaven, like
I know, but I just
the beauty that leads you to God.
I just felt like, to me, it's like I really liked the Inferno, and Paradise was kind of, I had to struggle with it. I'm not Catholic, so I had to look at it as like a spiritual journey, because that was kind of difficult for me. But it was really interesting. Like at one point, I think it's in Purgatory, he's looking at these two. There's these two lovers that came. Or there was something, and then he has them like where they're like struck, and recognizing their own wrongs. I'm thinking, do you realize this in yourself?
Well, I felt like with Dorothy Sayers, like she constantly was pointing out, like, here's where we're laughing at Dante. Here's where Dante is laughing at himself, and like, here's where Dante is acknowledging his own sinfulness. So like, I don't know.
Okay.
I get the feeling that like Dante is sort of this buffoon. That is,
Okay.
He
Well,
knows
maybe-
he's a buffoon, even as he's trying to get up through purgatory and paradise. Like he's not like, oh yes, I deserve this journey. He's
well,
like,
maybe I'd like it
the
better
guy
if I read her.
shrinking in the corner,
Yeah.
like, I don't really know why I'm here, but I'm going to do my best to keep going.
I read Anthony Insolence, which is kind of cool because it had the Italian right next to it. But maybe I'd like it better if I read her annotations, because I was just kind of like just looking at Dante as his life and just kind of how, you know, because you read the stories about his family. I mean, it's just all kinds of family drama with Dante. And so when you know his family drama and then he's writing this story, it's like, dude, come on, you're just. So for me, for Paradise, it's like it didn't feel as real to me because I felt like, does Dante really know what true love is? That was my question. But I have issues with Dante. Yeah. Okay.
Definitely.
Okay. But
Yeah.
I guess that's one that needs more conversation.
Maybe we should read those.
On another live stream.
Yeah. So my
Oh.
mom said she preferred to read it. So yeah, she was reading this like in the evenings and while she was sick and commenting to me, you know, messaging me about it. So that was really fun. And Lori listened to all 12 on YouTube. Yes, it was a little different from the book. There were some things missing, you know, in the audio play that were in the book. And that's amazing that you listened with your husband as well and had good conversations. I love that. I think that's something that is like a Dorothy approved activity. Okay, cool. So why don't we move on? What did you guys rate the book?
I can't read books. I either like it or I can't. It's just, I feel like people, you know, you put whatever the book is, usually they're putting your heart into it. So I don't like numbers on, it's just me. I'm just really bad at
I'm
it.
the same. I just can't do it. I don't even know where I'd begin. Like, and with so many different books, it's like maybe like the writing is really, really great, but like there are like other issues. Like I reread Paradise Lost this year, and I was like, obviously on like a writing like level, this is a 10, but on other levels, this is like in the negatives. But like, yeah, Milton just annoyed me in various ways. So it's like I can't give one number to it because I had different thoughts and feelings. I mean, I would rate this very highly. I feel like when it comes to Dorothy Sayers, like her like the essays that we read in Letters to a Diminished Church, or say the Lord Peter Wimsey books, like the Harriet Vane trilogy, like it's a very different experience from reading this because she's trying to give like the apostles their own voices and Christ his own voice. Like she's not writing with her own voice, and I kind of missed her voice, which because I just think she's so brilliant, and you do get it when you read like the notes in the introduction. But so it was weird because it was like, this is still Dorothy Sayers, but like some of the things that I usually like in it are missing.
Yeah. What about you, Victoria?
I think if I was like forced at gunpoint to give it a Goodreads rating,
You don't have to.
Not that you're forcing me at gunpoint.
Not at all.
I think it would be 4 stars, a 4-star read for me. And I think it's brilliant, and I really like a lot of what she did with it. There was one distracting thing for me, and it was the dialogue itself being very like stylistic of the time as well that she was writing in, and like some of like the British slang sometimes would like take me out of it. But that's like, I feel like that's such a nitpick for what this book for what these plays do, and like the brilliance of them. I do think they're a treasure. It's just the very British dialogue sometimes like distracted me a little bit.
That was an interesting choice. Yeah.
I do feel like it was written very specifically for her audience. You know, like it wasn't
like I
this
get
is
it.
a timeless work. This is like, here are the people living here and now, and I want it to speak to them in their language. So I'm gonna like, you know, make it as modern as I can. Like when I watch The Chosen, sometimes there's stuff that's like very modern that like, it's like in a way you like it because they would have said something like that in their own dialect of the time. But it does make me think, like, if you watch this show in 50 years, you're gonna be like, what does that even mean?
Yeah, I know. I've also watched The Chosen, and I have similar problems with it as far as like the just like I don't know, the time period, and it's just hard. It's a hard like balance to walk because you want it to be relevant to your audience, and you want your audience to connect with it, and I totally understand like why those decisions are made and like why Dorothy Sayers would have made that decision. I guess just it just as a reader now, sometimes I was like having a hard time imagining everyone British.
You know, that was one of the things that kind of was weird to me about English accents, right? Except for in the parable of the was it the steward or something? And then they have like this middle, that was like, what are you saying here? It's just, that was kind of, I don't know. Did that strike you at all? Did you catch? I guess that you'd had to listen to it on audiobook to even.
Yeah, no, I remember that one. I guess it didn't really bother me. It's like if you were telling a story to a friend and you wanted to emphasize the, you know, you'd adopt a certain accent.
Yeah, but
Her
they're all.
notes on the accents are so interesting. Like she was initially saying that, like, because Christ is a Nazarene, he should sound like she wanted to be like, well, the Nazarenes and the people from Galilee should sound different. But she was like we can't like they had to have British accents because they're speaking English. So I thought it was interesting that
like,
the way she was like sort of wrestling
comments
with
on that.
what
was her, because it sounded like a Middle Eastern merchant. They're all from.
Well, that in that case, I think it was because
Yeah.
he was telling the parable. He was like telling it in the voice of the person. But
Okay. Yeah. Did she
I
have
can't
notes
remember,
on
I
that?
can't remember where that
I'd have to look at that. I was listening to the audiobook at that point, so.
Yeah, I didn't think it was disrespectful at all. It was just like trying to tell a story in a way that made it, you know, come alive.
Mm-hmm.
So what about you, Christy? How do you rate it?
Oh, 100 out of 100.
Okay, Kristen, I didn't notice that. Did it come through more obvious?
Wow, is
in the
every
book?
single I didn't remember that either, but I easily could have missed it.
I totally missed that part of it. Okay, I might have to listen to it again and pay attention.
In the Discord discussion, someone pointed out the phrase "fast and loose" was used once. We were kind of having a chuckle about it. Some of the terminology of like, yeah.
Oh yeah. Do you want me to read this part quick from one of the notes? It's about accents.
Yes.
She says, note on accent and dialect. This whole question presented great difficulties. For complete realism, all the Galilean characters, including Jesus, ought to speak with a strong local dialect, and the Jerusalem contingent with another, while the Romans would have to be distinguished according to whether they were speaking Latin to one another or struggling to express themselves to the local inhabitants in bad Aramaic, or possibly in colloquial Greek. That adds another thing, because obviously it's all in English, but in real life, these characters might have been speaking different languages in different situations. It was felt that to land ourselves with a Jesus and disciples consistently speaking broad Scots, Welsh, Irish, Yorkshire, Somerset, or Mummerzet would be trying to the listener, make difficulties in casting, and possibly arouse a certain resentment among local patriots whose particular form of speech had not been chosen. We decided that Jesus and his mother should speak standard English, but that the multitudes should be allowed to speak rough, though without any attempt at discriminating between the dialects in various parts of Palestine. Yeah, she doesn't speak about the parables, but just that I thought that was so interesting that she wanted like the Romans and the Jerusalem Jews and the Galilean Jews to all be distinguishable by their accents.
I remember somewhere in the notes she said one of these characters should speak with a French accent.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like she was going for like the feel of it, of like trying to like translate the situation in that time to the accents and sort of, understanding that we have in the modern day.
Yeah. It makes sense. I think it's really smart what she tried to do with language and dialect and accents. I do think it's smart. It just sometimes I was just like distracted by it, but yeah.
I guess it's a difficulty you always have, because like in The Chosen, I find the accents a little bit distracting, because I think
Yeah.
they do try
I
to
do
give them
too.
all Middle Eastern accents, but of course they're speaking English, so it's like if we were listening to them speaking their original languages, then it's just they're all doing their best, and it's interesting to see the different interpretations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. I have the same the same thing with The Chosen. Because sometimes I'm like, I wish they would just sometimes just as like a producer, just have everyone. If you're speaking English, just speak
Speak
English as
normally,
you
yeah.
would. Like, don't
Like
try to put a fake
I get
Middle
what you were
Eastern
going
accent.
for, but
Yeah, but that's just a personal problem. Everyone feels differently about that, I'm sure.
So this is interesting. So Tony liked the radio version. I didn't know you were reading along with us, Tony. I'm glad you did. Yeah, that's interesting. You would be able to distinguish the different things. That's so cool. And that one of them was totally from Talk Through.
that's what I meant to look up the voice of oh my goodness, I know his name. It's not Caiaphas, is it the head priest? Is it
Annas?
Oh.
What's
Annas? I always forget
no,
one of the
he's
two.
Annas' son-in-law. Is it Caiaphas? I feel like it begins with a C.
Yeah, it would be Caiaphas. There was
Oh.
So one was the father. They had basically they're kind of like a little mafia. There was if it was the son-in-law, it was and Caiaphas. Annas was the like the mob boss basically, and they pretty much they were not in the line of Aaron. They shouldn't have been high priest. The Romans appointed them, and they basically held the power of the temple for about 40 years between the different sons.
Yeah. You can see what Dorothy thinks of Caiaphas from the notes. She's like, he is a nasty piece of work. But his voice in the radio play, I thought, was one of the best like actor deliveries and voices. Like he was, I thought, stunning. But it reminded me of my family's been watching the show Andor on Disney Plus. It's a Star Wars show. It's really good. And the head Imperial guy sounds so much like Caiaphas, and I've been meaning to look up like it couldn't be because he's an older guy.
Oh, maybe.
Could it be the same one?
That's so fun.
That's funny. Faith, I think that's a really good point. I totally get that.
Mm. We have some 5 stars! Yay! I'm so glad that you rode along with us, Lori, and your husband as well. That's really the goal. And C.S. Lewis read this annually as well at Christmas time. So you're in good company reading it annually. And Kristen says it was a 5-star book.
Yeah, I think we should like start getting a collection of things like this to read during, from like Christmas to Advent to Easter, because especially for us Protestants, we don't like.
I know.
We don't really know how to observe Christmas, really.
We have nothing.
We don't.
That's really why I started doing like Lent TBRs and Advent read-alongs, is because I was really thirsting for some like Christian and Catholic, community.
Like liturgy.
thinkers.
Liturgy is a thing.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a reason for it.
Yes. And it really made Christmas so special.
Did I tell you I got to teach Afghans how to celebrate Christmas?
Oh, on one of your classes?
Yeah.
That
the
is
refugees.
So cool.
They didn't. All they really know about Christmas is Santa Claus. They call him Baba Noel, and so they didn't. They didn't know why they have trees. They didn't like all of the. You know what? They have the kids at the class. The kids come and sing a song, and that day they had a "We Wish You a Merry Christmas," and their teacher asked, "Well, what is good cheer?" And so I was explaining it, but then this last Tuesday, we, my friends in the apologetics program have kind of been following along. I've been given the play-by-play of what's been going on in the, like, this immigration adventure, and so people donated and sent them money to celebrate Christmas.
So
And I was like, "This is what it is."
yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yes, so touching. I agree. There were so many moments where I was just like, whenever they were talking about Mary, I was just like, oh, I just love her. Like, and I thought Martha, I was always laughing whenever they were talking about, like, it just really did touch my emotions as well. And
The crucifixion was really effective and hard to read. I was like in tears. I think that was probably the most effective part for me was the last couple plays.
I think it's a good reminder of, like, just these are real people, and, like, we have a very brief description of the things that happened, but there was just whole things of life behind it, and all these different little players that we don't even know about, these different influences and things. And I think that I think the first thing that I actually read that kind of helped me see that was the synopsis of the Gospels, like putting where they're all the same scenes are put side by side, so you can see how things, how the Gospel writers presented things in the same way, and then how they, or what they took out, what they included and what they took out. It just kind of gives you a sense of, like, I don't know. For me, it helped me hear their voice better. And this is like another one of those things, like, okay, really, what was going on? Like, I always think, like, the scene where they're going to, Jesus is told that Lazarus is dead, and Thomas comes in, and he's like, they're all like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Like, he's dead. Why are you going back there? They want to kill you. And then Thomas is like, comes in, he's like, okay, let's just go die with Jesus. And this is just in John. I'm thinking this must have been something that was funny. And this is like John remembering. Like, do you remember this? Remember when this happened? Because when he wrote his gospel, it was like at the end of the first century. It's at least 30 years after when the others were written. And so there's probably things, jokes, inside jokes that we completely miss all the way through his gospel, I think.
This is reminding me of The Name of the Rose, because there's this whole section in there talking about whether Jesus laughed, and the monks are debating this, like, very seriously. Did Jesus laugh? Because if he's omniscient, one of them says, well, if he's omniscient, he already knows what everybody's thinking, so he's probably not laughing because it's not funny anymore. But I do think Jesus had a sense of humor.
Yeah. I feel like where else did humans get it?
Yeah.
I feel like a sense of humor must be definitely an integral part of God's.
Absolutely.
All right. Yeah.
Kristen mentions being a mom and resonating with Mary, and I totally had the same experience because, like, I'm a new mom, and so, like, now whenever there's like a mom in anything, I'm always like paying attention to that character like really closely. And I totally saw that. I totally saw her with new eyes and her perspective. Yeah, she has some really beautiful quotes as well in these plays.
I liked Dorothy Sayers' interpretation of Jesus and Mary very much, because there's sometimes in the Bible when you're reading in the Gospels and you're like, oh, that must have hurt the mother's heart, but I just feel like she interpreted everything Jesus said very tenderly or with humor in a way that may not just come across if you're just reading the biblical narratives.
You have to wonder, like, okay, so now that you say that, this didn't occur to me until you just said that. She knew he was a Messiah, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what was her idea about the Messiah?
Yeah, we don't. It doesn't.
See, I feel like she was so close with God that, like, because all these other people in the book, it is fascinating the way it's like they think this is what the Messiah is going to be, or this is what the Messiah is going to be. Like, they have these very specific ideas where I feel like Mary would have had the humility to say, it is what God says it is. Like, it's not for me to define it. It's what God says it is. And, it'll be revealed to me when I need to know it. But when I'm reading that book, Devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary by, I always forget his name, the 17th century French saint. And he's just the way he describes Mary is so beautiful. And the way he like emphasizes her humility is as like her strength and her power, which people don't think of humility as like a powerful thing, but it is. It's what God calls us to. And I feel like Mary had that from the very beginning.
Yeah. I think that's why God chose her. She had that capacity.
That's it. St. Louis de Montfort, Faith.
Faith knows. Is that the one you were quoting in your recent vlog with like the cover? Okay, yeah. That was so interesting. I loved John too. He was great.
I didn't realize this until I was reading, looking at the printed version, but he's the narrator too, right? Is that the evangelist? Because I somehow didn't make that connection right away. It like took a while.
Yeah.
I like how Tony was looking for Doctor Who actors.
Yes. That is cool. Yep. Okay. That is really exciting to hear. We'll be reading it at the same time again.
I might try to listen to it in Lent since I read it physically this time, because I feel like I did miss out on like the fact that it is an audio play. I feel like I should go back and get that experience now as well.
And I think now that you've physically read it, you'll be able to follow it really well.
Yeah, that's why I chose to do that.
So let's see. Well, we've already covered parts of all these questions, but is there anything specific that you liked that you wanted to also mention?
I don't know. It was a specific thing, but I really appreciated that she was able to, sometimes when you read things like that, it's almost feels, it's like retelling of the story, but it's kind of dead. But she was able to really, I think, bring life to it and just imagine them as individual people. Like not just individual people, but like individual people coming from, all these different places, right? They all these individual people all have their own little ecosystem of influences and things going on with their life. And I thought that was, I don't know, I guess that's just even as not just telling the story of Jesus, but writing as a writer. I think that's good to recognize, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I think the main thing for me was I enjoyed like finding Dorothy L Sayers ideas throughout the text as well, and I feel like you can either like some people might not like that because they just want maybe a strict retelling, but I found her ideas of the psychology of the characters and like what might have happened. I've just found that to be a really interesting element of these. So I think that might have been my favorite thing. It was actually finding her ideas throughout the text.
Yeah. It's almost like reading a commentary.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What about you, Emma?
Yeah, I really liked that. Just the way it made the situation come alive. Picturing all the people who would have been there, and it makes it easier to put yourself in that, to imagine it, as a thing that happened and not just a book or these wise sayings that you're reading. It just reminds you of the reality of it, which is so important.
Mm-hmm. I think what I really liked, excuse me, still getting over a cold. I thought it was so interesting how she showed the confusion of the times and how the disciples and everyone else was thinking about Jesus and who he was, and like puzzling over the things that he said. And you still see like certain characters just trusting him all the way through, even if they didn't understand. But then there's people on the outside who were like determined to misunderstand and think of him in their own way. It was just so interesting seeing how everybody interpreted Jesus, as a character. Because I think it's really stood in for how people still think about Jesus and questions that they still have. And I feel like this play, it really kind of answered the question of, there's this modern idea out there that Jesus was just a teacher and wasn't really claiming to be God, or that doesn't really matter. But that was central to his character and to his mission here on earth, that he was claiming to be God. And I feel like the play really made that very clear. So there's just a lot of truths that the play clarified. When you imagine it, it can't be any other way. And you might not think of those things if you're just reading the Gospels. Of course, the Gospels speak for themselves, but seeing it very clearly imagined sometimes will just bring it home to you, the truth of certain things. So I really loved that about it.
Yeah, it was kind of so I read this book a few years ago called The Later Herods, and it was by Stuart Perwin. He describes the time. He wrote another book about Herod the Great, which I have not got yet, but he describes the times, and that was one thing. I think the first thing that really helped me understand just how political everything was. I mean, when we read in the Gospels, what we're reading is really some outworking of some corruption, greed, and dirty politics is what's going on there. And I think we think about we don't see how the two are intertwined. It's both about how do we interact with people, right? And so Jesus came so we could have not only good relationships with God, but good relationships with each other. And so that's always been, in every country, it's always been the war, like power, greed, or who's caring for their neighbor. And Jesus is speaking directly into that. And one of the things about this particular play is that it helped me. Sometimes when you read something, that what Jesus is saying, you know that, okay, there's a specific situation that he's talking about here. We may not know what it is, but he's speaking to somebody specifically. And there were a lot more things like that in this play that, like, okay, yeah, there was something else going on here that we just take it as a saying, but he was talking to somebody when he was making a point.
Yeah, I loved how she put the parables in context like that. It's like there was always something happening in the situation, and he was like, okay, I'm going to tell you this story because it's relevant to what you're going through.
Yeah, that was another thing. The way she arranged things, sometimes something would happen and then she would put a parable right after it, and they kind of informed each other.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Kristen says her two favorite parts were the visits of the wise man. Yes, I loved that. I loved the beginning of the play just felt so magical and mysterious. Really wonderful. And Lazarus's comments after he was raised from the dead. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I like that part too. The Lazarus scenes were really great. He has some good quotes as well.
Yes. Thinking about, I like how she portrayed, Jesus was no dummy. So the fact that Judas was among the apostles, I like how she kind of explained his presence there.
In the introduction, there was this part where she mentions that someone wrote to her and was like, Judas seems like a great guy. I don't know why you portrayed him. Or like they like thought, and she was like, yeah, you're probably having the same problems Judas had if you think he was all on the up and up and that he was the one. Yeah, because she writes him in such a sort of, convincing way that she makes you look at Judas in a way you didn't before. I felt the same way.
Well, I think that's one of the things we should like reflect and say, okay, how are we? In what way are we Judas? You know, everybody thinks doesn't matter what anybody does, they find a way to excuse it. And honestly, I mean, the only unusual thing about that was that he repented afterwards. You know, he had remorse. That was kind of the only odd thing about the whole thing. I mean, people do stuff like that all the time. You know, sell out friends, betray people, you know, things. And do you know anybody that does things like that and doesn't think they're in the right?
That's true. He felt justified all the way up until suddenly he didn't.
Although even in the end, like, it's not a true repentance, because he didn't think God could forgive him. He still was going on his own reason.
Yeah.
He still was not surrendering to God, and that's why.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah, Peter and Judas were kind of contrasted there at the end.
Yeah, because Peter does really
repent. Yeah. And God could have, used Judas if he had repented.
Yeah, that's I never thought about that. That's really interesting. So you can feel badly about something, but you still have to make the step of wanting God to forgive you for it, or asking. It's the humility, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you can know you've done wrong and wallow in condemnation and remorse, but you don't have freedom until you're willing to ask God to, you know, have the humility to ask God to forgive you of it.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like maybe Dorothy Sayers was trying to say through her Judas portrayal of, like, it's harder for intellectuals to ask for repentance in some cases, like not always, but
yeah.
I feel like that's part of the message.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. So my mom's favorite parts were when Jesus healed the centurion's son and raised the little boy. Yes, I agree.
I did love that centurion segment where it's just like in the Bible. He's like, well, I'm a commander. When I command my men to do something, they do it. I'm not in any doubt. So obviously you're this powerful prophet. If you make the command, it's going to happen. Like, you don't need to be there. You can just say it.
Yeah. You know, like, you don't need to come to my house. You would see all these.
Only say the word and my soul. Well, in the Catholic liturgy, we say, only say the word and my soul shall be healed. That's part of it. But only say the word and my servant shall be healed.
That's one of the things my mom pointed out, and not reading this book, but just in generally, she said that miracle was the faith of a Gentile, right? And it was that miracle, the faith of a Gentile, that led to, it's like a buildup of greater and greater miracles until Lazarus rose from the dead. It's like the Gentiles' faith gave that seed of faith, and then other bigger miracles happened after that.
All right. So Faith says, since she hasn't finished all the plays and hasn't listened either, maybe she only has a partial impression, but she thinks that playing Jesus must have been very hard to get right.
Oh yeah.
When I read like the way Dorothy Sayers in the notes would talk about how Jesus should deliver his accent, or like how he should deliver this, but I was like, how are you going to find someone who's going to do this? Because that sounds impossible.
Yeah,
I thought they did a relatively good. I was fine with the actor who did it in the audiobook, but definitely that would be so difficult.
Mm-hmm.
It just makes me think of when we read her essays last year, and she talked about it's most important that if you're putting on a play, it doesn't matter what the actor believes. It just matters that he's very good. You know, that's the most important thing. So I imagine if she had any control at all when they were putting together this radio play, then she would have been like, let's find the guy who can do this the absolute best, you know?
So I'm curious, Emma, have you read, is there an autobiography about her? Have you read it?
I think there is, but I haven't read it. Have you read it,
okay.
Chrissy?
I haven't. But someone recommended it to me on a video recently. I was like, yes, I will read it.
I think she must have been a very interesting person.
Yeah.
Like, and if I'm reading the autobiography, I wonder if reading this again, you'd see like maybe more of her in it than maybe that we're recognizing, you know, like shaking, like what is it that we read this or listen to the play or whatever we're doing, however we're going through it, and this is the play that we're reading, right? But there must have been probably things that were going against some common perceptions of how the gospel story should be told or how Jesus's life should be told. Maybe she was shaking some things up that were like totally missing, you know?
I think because in the introduction, she talks about how the play hadn't even come out. And like the way that the like newspaper men wrote about it, and they weren't even like hating on it or anything, but just the sort of their description of the project enraged people so much that they wrote letters to the BBC being like, how can you do this? And it's like, you haven't even heard the play yet. How can you make this judgment on it?
I didn't know that. That's
and the fact that she's a woman too. The fact that she's a woman that probably got people all riled up. I don't know if it's as, you know, women so much resistance against women in teaching and writing on theology as it was in Britain as it is in the U.S. But because I've read that it's basically like the last 50 years of evangelical culture that's really put a lot of blocks to women even having an opinion. Like Beth Moore on Twitter. People are riled up all the time.
Oh, Twitter.
I hope that she never lets that get her down though. Like, because I'm sure, yeah, she lived in a culture where it was men were in most of the positions of power, but like she was given this job. Like she never like. I feel like our culture, especially in retrospect, is like, oh, this woman was oppressed, and it's like, no, she was just getting on with her job, getting on with her life, writing a phenomenal play cycle, doing the research. Like she didn't let it bother her that like other people were holding on her, she didn't let herself be held down, you know? Like, well, I feel like
I'm just saying, yeah, but I'm just saying, like, she was, like, basically bulldozing ahead, right? She just kept going.
But I feel like women have been doing that since the very beginning and still are. And, like, that's not changed, you know? I don't know. I know. It just bugs me the way people talk more about the barriers put on women instead of what women were doing. Because it's like...
But if you don't recognize what the barriers are, then you don't recognize the struggle either. You know, if it wasn't hard, then you wouldn't recognize what the victory is.
I just oftentimes see all the attention put on the barrier and like almost next to no attention put on the work and the victory and the who she was as a person, you know?
Yeah, but that's what I want to know. I want to know, like, who was she riling up when she was writing the story? I mean, is there some pet? Because you know, there's got to be some pet theories that she was blowing with this play. I mean, it may not seem like it, but people have very specific ideas about the Bible and Jesus's life, right? And so she's not writing, you know, a book or a dissertation like refuting him, but she's writing a play that is grabbing the imagination a lot more than those, you know, a nonfiction book would. So what is she doing here that was bothering people? Because I'm sure that there was.
Maybe we can read a biography during a month in November.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a really fun idea. I would love that. Yeah, we'll have to talk about more readathon ideas because I have a couple. But I need to gather everybody's thoughts on this and we'll pick something good.
Ever since you introduced me to Dorothy L Sayers, I feel like I have to read her every year now.
Yay! That was the goal.
It worked.
Yay! I'm so glad to hear that. She is one of my top 5 authors, so I'm very pleased that I'm finding friends here who want to read her with me.
So how did you first come across her, Christy?
College. Regent University. Yep.
Okay.
They introduced me to Flannery O'Connor as well, so I owe them a large debt.
So you didn't read Flannery O'Connor in high school?
I don't think so.
Really? Okay,
yeah.
You did.
My teachers
quite a bit, actually.
Really not my favorite stuff in high school.
Yeah, we read like Sylvia Plath, Flannery O'Connor, those Yeah, a lot of those. I have to say that my high school English classes were a really great experience. And really good English teachers.
Aw.
We read a lot of different writers and had some really good discussions.
So good.
Yeah.
That's really. I know Victoria had a similar experience.
Yeah, I think it depends on your teachers that you had in high
Mhm.
school as well. Like my senior English teacher was like, he just exposed us to all kinds of stuff that was very unconventional stuff to read. Like we were reading Murakami in senior year of high school. It was just like very like not your standard
That is so cool.
reading. Yeah, it totally depends on your teacher.
I think I really loved my teachers, but I didn't like what they picked. Okay, what maybe stood out as something that you didn't like as much in this play? If there is anything? I know Victoria mentioned something. Is there anything else, Victoria?
That was like my only gripe was sometimes
Okay.
the dialogue. But I'd be curious to hear if anyone else has anything.
Yeah, I don't think I do. It really, you called it. That was the only thing I would mention is that like it was sometimes jarring because it was written for that specific audience. It's using their phrases that like we aren't as familiar with. But.
Mhm.
You know, I don't really have anything. I think I am more audio is so it was interesting listening to this as mostly as an audiobook, but audio is like my least like visual reading audio isn't it? So I don't even know that that may sound weird, but I don't really connect enough to really have something to say I didn't like about it. You know what I mean? It's like I don't listen to audiobooks as much. I don't know. I think that's one of the poetry too. I need to like develop my appreciation for both poetry and plays. So I don't really think I even have enough
Same.
basis to really have any criticisms of it, honestly. So
Yay! Okay, that's really great to hear because I didn't have any criticisms either. So if anyone in the chat has a criticism, let us know. We don't seem to have any. But if you do, please feel free to share. So I want to open up to the chat. If you guys have any questions, please leave those as well in the chat because we only have one more question left and then we'll probably be signing off. So if you have any questions that you want us to answer, go ahead and leave those in the chat. And our final planned question is did anybody have any quotes that they wanted to share that they marked? Okay, Victoria's nodding. No, Victoria.
Actually, that's one thing I very intentionally did was like I was writing down all the quotes that I loved, and I have like pages, at least a few pages of them. But
Wow.
I'll just share one because Mary had a dialogue that would just like wrecked my soul.
Oh.
This is just like so beautiful. It's Jesus's birth, and she has this beautiful dialogue. She says, "I feel as though I were holding the whole world in my arms, the sky and the sea and the green earth and all the seraphim. And then again, everything becomes quite simple and familiar, and I know that he is just my own dear son. If he grew up to be wiser than Moses, holier than Aaron, or more splendid than Solomon, that would still be true. He will always be my baby, my sweet Jesus, whom I love. Nothing can ever change that." And I was just like, it's so beautiful.
Yes. That is a great one. I loved the nativity scene at the beginning. I thought it was so perfectly done.
Yeah.
Is there any other ones that you wanted to share, Victoria?
Oh, I could, but I don't want to take away from anyone else.
We'll come
I
back.
only have one. I put it on I was just finishing up. I try to do this kind of quotation journal where I do like a little sketch, and then I put my favorite lines. So I had one of these as that. Yeah, this was from John asking shortly after John had met Jesus. "Master, what is holiness? Is it just to keep the commandments and say the right prayers and do the right things and pay the proper dues as the priests tell us? Or is it something quite different? The preaching of John the Baptist has troubled our hearts, and the great prophets have terrified us with their thunderings against sin. We are disheartened because nothing we do seems to be any good, and the righteous God is so great and terrible and far away. How can we rise so far above ourselves? What sort of heroic thing is holiness? Just thought that was so beautiful, and I feel like I didn't have room for Christ's reply, but it was basically to love and let yourself be loved, or something like that. That it's so simple that children can understand it. So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes, I love that. Did you have any quotes, Carla?
Well, I have a whole bunch highlighted in my Kindle, but I didn't pick out one specific. So I'd say, Victoria, go again with one of your quotes.
Okay, I have one more.
Okay.
And I liked Lazarus when he was talking. They were asking him, what was it like? What was death like? What was it like to die? Basically, like a woman asked him that, and he's a little bit like, I don't even know how to answer that question. But what he says was just really interesting. And I don't think I wrote down the whole quote, but I wrote down this part. He says, this life is like weaving at the back of the loom. All you see is the crossing of the threads. In that life, you go around to the front and see the wonder of the pattern, beautiful and terrible. And how can I tell you? It is familiar. You have known it from all eternity. For he that made it is the form of all things, himself, both the weaver and the loom. And I was just like, I'm blown.
Yes.
I just like how she wrote that.
Yes. My mom agrees. And Lori loves all the Mary quotes. So my quote was also Mary and the wise man Balthazar talking. It's like they talk together. This was, I think, in the first play. So Balthazar says, I speak for a sorrowful people, for the ignorant and the poor. We rise up to labor and lie down to sleep, and night is only a pause between one burden and another. Fear is our daily companion, the fear of want, the fear of war, the fear of cruel death, and of still more cruel life. But all this we could bear if we knew that we did not suffer in vain, that God was beside us in this struggle, sharing the miseries of his own world. For the riddle that torments the world is this: shall sorrow and love be reconciled at last when the promised kingdom comes? And Mary has a bit of a longer example, but I'm just going to read part of it, or a longer reply, but I'm just going to read part of it. I am quite humbly born, yet the power of God came upon me. Very foolish and unlearned, yet the word of God was spoken to me. I was in deep distress when my baby was born and filled my life with love. So I know very well that wisdom and power and sorrow can live together with love. And for me, the child in my arms is the answer to all the riddles. I love that.
That's a really good passage.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I loved it. Yes. It was so special, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I agree. Okay, this is interesting. So Kristen went to a K-12 school whose educational philosophy was largely based on Sayers' writings, and yet I'd never read her before.
That's hilarious.
She does have, there is something that she wrote about education, and I think I have it on my Kindle, but I haven't read it yet. But I remember reading I have read some of her thoughts on education. Like, for example, she believes that you should start with the classics with children and teenagers, because even though they're long, they're actually very accessible. And a lot of modern works are written with a knowledge of those already. And so you won't understand modern works, even though they're shorter and they're written in modern day language, which might make them easier. You won't understand them as well if you're not familiar with the classics. So I know she argues for reading the classics, and I agree with that so strongly. That was what I didn't like in my school, was in my high school, we read so much modern stuff, and I didn't get it. I didn't like it. I didn't understand it at all. But when I started reading classics, I really loved them. And now I actually appreciate modern authors more. So I think she was onto something there.
That's actually, I know that C.S. Lewis wrote a lot about that. George MacDonald, Tolkien. They had this big debate between Tolkien and Lewis about classics or modern, and Tolkien was classics, and he converted Lewis to agreeing with him because Lewis was more modern at first, and then he switched. Yeah,
That is interesting. The Inklings had a debate.
they did.
The lost tools of learning. It sounds like that's the.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I have heard of that now that you guys say that.
Oh,
Need to read
speech.
that.
Interesting. I didn't realize that Sayers gave speeches. Okay, so my mom mentioned this earlier. In the introduction of the play, she mentioned a law forbidding the representation of any persons of the Trinity regarding the opposition to her play.
I didn't know that. In the introduction, it mentioned that at that time, Christ could not be portrayed on stage. So the way they got around it is that this isn't going to have a live audience. So there's no difference really between the actor saying Christ's lines and the priest up at the altar saying Christ's lines. It's just reading it out. It's not like a play on stage. But I didn't know they ever had that law. That's that. So yeah, I'm sure some of the opposition.
Wow.
That is fascinating. Thank you, Mom.
In one of the Harriet Vane books, the first Harriet Vane book, Lord Peter Wimsey is her detective who she wrote famous. Her novels about him are very, very famous and popular. And there are 3 books with a character named Harriet Vane, and she's introduced in the first one, and she's an author, Harriet Vane. So you always feel like it's kind of like Dorothy Sayers' own alter ego. But in the first book, well, I guess I won't give anything away, but the character gets all these hate letters, and they're so, it's just, it kind of breaks your heart to hear about. And I feel like Dorothy Sayers herself must have dealt with that, that she was writing from firsthand experience.
Gosh, she must have.
I love
like, oh, well, they weren't on Twitter, they weren't on YouTube, they didn't have like the comments, but no, people still sat down and wrote letters just to be nasty. So
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, her mysteries are, I'm not really a mystery reader normally, but I love her mysteries largely because it's her writing them, I think. I just love how her brain works.
Our next issue of an Unexpected Journal coming out in March is on mysteries. And ironically, we don't have anything. I don't think we have anything about Sayers. Seth wrote something where he is including something about Sayers, but I'm like, how is that even possible? Like Megan Riles? I mean, she loves Dorothy Sayers. I can't believe nobody wrote anything about it. So if you want to whip something out, I'm putting it together right now.
All right. I'll see if I can come up with something.
Yeah.
I think that is it, guys. This was such a great discussion. Better than I ever could have imagined.
This was so fun. Thank you.
Great read along. Yeah, thank you, Christy, for organizing.
Of course. It's really like always a dream come true when something like this works out and everybody wants to do it. And so thank you so much to my co-hosts for reading along. Thank you, Victoria, for doing the Discord, and for everybody coming on the live shows, and everybody in the chat, like everybody who's leaving encouraging comments like on videos and stuff. This was really, really fun, and we'll definitely let you know if we read more from Sayers or another author coming up, like a more liturgical read along. And yeah, stay tuned. And I hope you all had a wonderful Christmas and whatever holidays you were celebrating.
Happy New Year. It's almost 2023.
Yes. Happy
It's
New Year.
It's 2023 in Pakistan.
Yeah, and in Korea.
Some parts of the world, it's already begun.
Yes.
Yes.
Started.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.